Welcome to Pub in the Desert, where we bring you honest, curious conversations about faith and the human experience. I'm Matthias Miller here with my co host, Kevin David Kritner. Before we dive in, I want to recap our three guiding principles. First, you don't need to be fixed, you need to be known. And we believe that love is knowing and being known. Second, we approach difficult topics with genuine curiosity. We aren't here to win arguments, but to understand. Third, we don't come with preset agendas. We let conversations unfold naturally and we follow where authenticity leads us. So go ahead, pull up a chair, grab a drink, and let's explore what union looks like with God, with others, and with ourselves. So the fun thing that we have today is that we actually had a teaser last time for this time and our topic, drum roll please,
Which is
um,
exceedingly rare.
which is exceedingly rare. And I don't think we should even call it a topic. We should just call it our jumping off point is um, the insecure God. And I want to catch some people up to, there's just a little bit of a conversation that we were diving into that I think lends itself well into this conversation. Kevin, we were talking about, I was talking about a song that by a Christian songwriter that was talking about it's called The Edge, and it's talking about the place of darkness where one of the lines in the song is life becomes more nightmare than a dream. And it's about the dark place of wondering whether life is actually worth living. And I remember as a kid listening to this and and resonating with it. And um, and you started talking about and I'll turn it over to you. Conversations people have with you about things that you
Yeah,
share.
yeah. Well, just for point of reference, it is now 6:20 in the morning, and we start recording at 6. And we just started recording because we just started talking for the beginning for 20 minutes. And finally, you were like, we should probably hit record, which gives you an insight into how we operate.
Well, next,
But
I'm still threatening to sometime hit the record button as soon as we get on. We can have our playful banter. I'm going to do it completely mid banter, and then
you should do it. Yeah,
yeah.
without a doubt. Well, you mentioned that line. It's a powerful line, but there was a line you mentioned before that when we were off air that said something like most people will never experience this.
Most people never know how dark this world can seem when life
Right.
becomes more a nightmare than a dream.
Yes. 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 Um, and that provoked me is like to my own experience, like pretty often I'm in conversations and just sharing back and forth stories, thoughts, all that kind of stuff. And people look at me and go like, "Well, that's really dark." And I had this conversation once with a chiropractor, and he was a believer, and we were talking about writers that we like, and I brought up Brennan Manning, and he looked at me with all seriousness, and he says, "You should be careful who you recommend him to because he's pretty dark." And it was perplexing to me because not once have I ever read any of his stuff and thought, "Wow, this is really dark." Like his whole message to me was hope. Like you are loved as you are, not as you should be. Like that's his whole message over and over again. And it was really perplexing. And I find that happening a lot. Like this is really dark. And people saying that. And I think what really struck me with that song was that line that most people will never know, like the darkness of this world. And I see that in my conversations. And I was joking with you. It's like, well, what I kind of want to respond in those moments is, oh, you think that's dark? I could go real dark. It gets way darker than that. It gets pitch black. Like this is the mellow version. Like I did this talk last week, last Thursday. And one of the people in the audience came up to me afterwards and they said, that was really good, made me think. And they're like, uh, I had told a story about when I was in eighth grade, and they're like, that was kind of a tough story to tell. It was kind of dark, and I was like, oh, I'm telling you the G-rated stories from my life. I'm not telling you the R-rated ones of like how dark it got. Like, it was just like that contrast in that moment of like, oh, like your perception was that that was really uncomfortable or really dark. And I get it for your experience, but for mine, that's not dark at all.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have a that line was like there's fundamental discomfort or levels of awareness or comfortability within human experience. And I think that, yeah, that I
All right. I can't tell who lost who here. So I think we might have lost Kevin for a minute here. Kevin, I finally have the floor. Uh, let's see. Give me a minute, guys. All right. Ah, we completely lost him, guys. So we're going to go ahead and give Kevin a chance to come on. His internet dropped out. I'm here desperately texting him and making sure my internet's good. And these things happen. So we'll. He says it froze. And then I dropped off. Who dropped off, Kevin? Was it me or was it you? It got really dark. It got pitch black, man. He's not even here to hear. Um, uh, yeah, we're gonna have to have Haley edit out some dead space here while we get this figured out. Um, all right. So speaking of going dark, pitch black, in fact. Here goes Kevin. Um, so
Perfect.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, I've just been observing and I haven't really had a category to put it in or just like and my wife and I have talked about it. We just like, why is it that so many of the people close to us are just like they're going through incredibly difficult times? Like what's
Yeah,
what's up? And I mean there's a lot of different reasons, but one of I think one of the things is first of all, I'll just highlight. I think my wife's generosity and her compassion for people has a way of attracting these people. Like she's always looking for ways to help out and be a support and um, and which I think is wonderful. But your statement almost also made me think about it. I think the sad reality is that it's really hard to. It's really uncomfortable. Well, it's always until you become comfortable being in the dark places, it's really uncomfortable being around somebody else in a dark place.
right.
And I think I think there ends up being some almost a line in the sand sometimes between the people who go to the dark side and the people who don't. And
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of boundaries, a lot of relationship management, a lot of, positivity, hope-filled words, kind of the focus on the good culture that gets established. And effectively, what it turns into is self-protection. I want to protect myself from your darkness
Yeah,
and and I want to live in a world that's bright and beautiful. And then sadly, the people who actually genuinely do experience darkness, either they're gaslit into denying the tragedy of what they're going through, or they find themselves embracing the reality, but doing so in a depth of isolation that's really adds insult to injury in a lot of ways.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I see the same thing because there's a line that you can approach that is, I'm with you, I hear you, I'm walking this path with you. And then there's a line where it becomes too uncomfortable, too real. And there's no, like, I'm not saying this as a condemnation of anybody. I'm saying it as a felt experience, something that I've seen and I've heard and I've known. Both sides of it, not just one side. Like that's too messy. Like I got to separate myself, or you're too messy. I'm going to separate myself from you. Seen both sides, and that is it's very true. Like when it gets dark, when it gets nasty, when it gets messy, like who stays around? Who's there with me? Um, I have that same ethos that your wife does or you do. Like when it gets messy, like okay, we haul in the sails and we batten down the hatches and we just ride this out. Um, and not because I don't think it was necessarily a choice on my part to begin with. It was like, we're here and this is messy, whether it's family situations or it's friends or it's marriage or it's whatever it is. It's like, no, we're here and there is no getting out of here, despite trying with everything in me to get out of here. There just wasn't any getting out of here. And for me personally, I'm not saying everybody should see it this way or can see it this way or will see it this way. Like I consider it a grace that I wasn't able to get out of here
Right.
because of what I've experienced and what I've learned in the midst of not being able to get out of here.
Yeah, I would echo that. I wouldn't have seen it as I definitely didn't see it on the grace on the far side of that, on the other side.
No.
And I also think that on the other side, one of the things that really kept me from staying with people in the messy situations was just the injustice of it or the not rightness of it in any number of dimensions.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think that that really rings as true. For my experience is like I had that experience of injustice and I knew how it felt. And there was something in me that wouldn't allow somebody else to feel that way alone. Not that I had control of how they felt, because I knew they were going to feel what they were going to feel, but I couldn't allow them to feel that way alone. Okay, I had a friend, have a friend, still do. A few years ago, he had started this company. He had two business partners. Long story short, business wasn't doing as well. And he had made some mistakes as far as paying himself out of the business and not paying the business back. And his business partners just kicked him out from the business he started. And it's a nuanced situation. It wasn't black and white. But he came to me, he's like, hey, this is what's going on. And it was like, hey, man, like, this is going to be painful for probably a few years. And the best we can do is stay present to whatever is coming and feel it and learn from it and, that kind of thing. And walk with him for like 2 years through that. And I look back now, and the only way I was able to do that was because I had experienced that as well. So I knew what it felt like. And there was something in me that said, like, could not allow him to walk through that alone. So I stayed.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know if you can do that aside from having that experience yourself. It would have been very easy for me to give him some pious platitudes. Hey, I'm praying for you. Send a text message every now and again. Hey, what's going on? How can I pray for you? And not that that's so subjectively bad. I think it's objectively good, but that's not what he needed. That's not what closeness looks like. That's not what love looks like. And I think it really ties to this concept that we ended with last time and started talking about today of the insecure God. And I think it really echoes. I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but one of my favorite quotes is from Blaise Pascal. It says, like, God made us in his image, and then man returned the favor.
Yeah.
And I think that insecure God is a projection of our experience.
So, I mean, let's explore this idea a little bit more. What does an insecure God look like? How and how does that then relate to us? And obviously, the insecure God is a false God. It's an idol. It's a mirage. It's all of those things.
Yeah, we're certainly not saying God in himself is insecure.
Have you guys heard the latest heresy from the Hub in the Desert podcast?
Right, yes.
God is so like us that, oh, good gracious. Anyway, um,
Yeah. Well, like, how I would describe it is the God that's very angry, very scared, very harsh, very judgmental, very black and white. That's the insecure God.
okay, so I mean, but this is interesting because um, I think scared is probably the one adjective that, in my mind, at least from my limited perspective of everybody else in the world, would be likely to be labeled as insecure,
Hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
harsh and black and white and angry, like that's not insecurity. That's just I mean, look at all the okay, I'm just gonna pivot for a moment. I've been in situations, never myself. Um actually it's I'm excluding myself not because this hasn't been me, but because it's far easier to observe other people than it is yourself in these situations.
Right.
Okay, let's be honest.
Clearer
Um
lens.
and these people who were acting like this, they were self-made, they were confident, they were large and in charge, they were the, you know, the appointed one, um, and and then um, the perception was not of insecurity. The perception was perhaps of power because that's how it got interpreted in my mind. I didn't look at them and be like, "Oh yeah, this person is insecure." No, I looked at them and said, "Wow, this person really is like." I think that's probably the best term I would have used. Like this person really wields power in
Yeah,
some,
that has a power to them.
yeah,
Yeah, could be intimidating.
right.
Right. But on a very human level, when you're projecting power, there's a need to project power. Why do you need to project power? That's the question that I think we should all answer. If we're in a situation where we're projecting power, whether it's anger or it's sarcasm or it's intellectualism or it's whatever the case may be, what is it? Why is there a need to project? To me, It covers, and this isn't a judgmental assessment. This is a, hey, let's get to the reality of the situation. Question. If I'm projecting power, the reason why you project power is because there's something to be protected. What's the thing we're protecting?
Well, just to state the same thing differently, what was jumping in my mind was there's a vulnerability that and to your point of walking through what we've been talking about, walking through dark places. Like what happens if you lose the company? What happens if all of these things happen? How do I control and manage my life so that I mean, if God is good, why do bad things happen to good people? So let me just prevent that question by making sure that only good things happen to good people, especially myself. And so that vulnerability, there is a just a vulnerability of exposure to what happens if I get thrown to the wolves? What happens if I get kicked out of the city and have to camp out in the desert? Um,
Right. What am I going to do?
what
Now,
am I
those
going
are
to do?
very human concerns, right?
Right.
Very human concerns. All of us experience it. What if I lose this business? What if I lose this relationship? What if I, right? Now, take that to an existential level. Let's talk about my eternal destination. What happens if I lose this?
Well, can we also take it even one step further? So, what happens to God when somebody proves him to be false? What
Right,
happens when to God when somebody gets away with something that he calls evil and nothing apparently happens?
right.
And I mean, again, here we are. Like we've it's like all of the stories in the Old Testament. Baal needs to defend himself. Like there's this image of God that must defend himself against these things because or else the perception breaks down.
Human gods need to defend themselves.
Human gods need to
God does not need to defend himself. Look at
okay.
Jesus when he's being tried. He does not waste one breath in defending himself. He doesn't need to.
Well, I mean, there's this fundamental reality of you're denying the truth. You know the truth. You're denying it. Like, what more is there to do at that point?
Be loud, be angry, make your claims, do all the things. Of course, you get every right to do that. As Paul says, everything is permissible. Not everything is beneficial, but you get the right to do that. But your loudness and your anger, they betray you. They betray you. You're protecting something. What is it you're protecting? Can we have that conversation? Jesus in the temple, angry, clearly. What's he protecting? The weak, the vulnerable, the marginalized, those who are being used for financial gain. That's what really angers him. Okay, so that's justifiable anger.
Right?
Awesome. What are you protecting with your anger, with your frustration, with your intellectualism, with your sarcasm? There's a real fear there. There's a real fear there.
I have to think of the verse in Micah 6 where it talks about us doing justly, walking humbly, and loving mercy. It's kind of the antidote to this whole thing. How do we lay this stuff down? Also, I'm jotting down a particular situation that's historically been very difficult for me to deal with. And then I just wrote out 9 layers of like, because of this, then this, and because of that, then this, and this is the domino effect. And eventually you get to talk about building walls and layers and dominoes, but eventually this is what you get to what I'm protecting.
What am I protecting?
What am I protecting?
Right. I got into this conversation with this councilwoman recently, and she had written something about the comedian Bill Maher, who used to be known as really, really left-leaning and that kind of stuff. And he had a I don't know, maybe this is a year ago or 6, 8 months ago. He went to the White House to have dinner with Trump, who he's been very vocal about not liking and that kind of thing. And he came back on his show and he's like, he was actually a relatable guy, and talked about that. And it was came out of left field, completely unexpected. And this councilwoman had written this post about how he had switched sides and just all sorts of character assassinations and how he was evil and how the true bearers of the truth were late night comedians like Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert and John Oliver and people like this. And I responded, I was like, you're not actually talking about the issues. You're talking about character assassination. You're doing it violently. I mean, just like some horrific names that she's calling people. And I was like, how do we get any closer to some sort of civil discourse with this? Was the point I was making. And to her credit, she responded with like, you're right. I attacked the person, not the concept, and so we had this really good conversation back and forth. But at some point, I asked her, "What are you protecting with the anger, with the rage, with the language? Like, what are you protecting?" And she was really honest. She was vulnerable. She said, "I don't want my kids to be raised in an America like this." Fair. Okay. Awesome. That's something we can talk about.
That's not just something we can talk about. That's something we can rally around.
None of us want a place like that for our kids to be raised in. None of us do. That's something we can unite on. That's something we can agree about. How we get there, we may have disagreements about. But that goal, we can all unite on that.
Talk about the enemy's tools for division.
Yeah.
I mean, genuinely, what would it? Okay, I understand there's disagreement. I think the insert little side note. One of the things that makes love and community so difficult is that for it to be heavenly, heaven-like, godlike, it has to involve mutual submission, and that's not something that we can control. And and so, in a beautiful, ideal world, how amazing would it be if we could unite around that? We want something better for our kids, and we had a world of mutual submission where it's like, here's my idea. This is what I think we should do. What is your idea? Here's the problem I see with your idea. What problems do you see with mine? Can we find a better third direction that is actually productive for everybody, that meets the goal that we're all circling around? But ironically, the moment that you flip into this self-protective stance, that completely breaks down. I mean, it's um, I think it's, I can't even remember whether it's Marcus Warner and Jim Wilder has the term enemy mode, and they talk about flipping into enemy mode, and it's the opposite of love.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's opposite of knowing and being known.
right.
Immediately, what we will start doing as human beings is when we feel threatened, we will start to develop a straw man, a concept of who this person is. Not via conversation, not via knowing and being known, but via my worst fears around this person. We'll create a straw man, and the sole purpose of that straw man is to be burnt down. So I create something that I can destroy. But I think the
Yeah.
difficult part is we're all human beings, and that's a very dehumanizing act. The desire to destroy somebody. It's the
Right.
ultimate in dehumanization, right? So
Right.
the idea is I build this straw man, this dehumanized thing, this object that now I can destroy and feel okay about it in myself. Because if this is a human being across from me that I sit face to face with and I have a conversation with, that becomes a very real lived human experience.
Well,
And I
and this,
can't destroy that thing in front of me, which I think is part of what the internet has done is I don't have to be face to face with somebody. I can dehumanize them, I can create this character and I can destroy them and never actually have to be face to face with that person.
one, and this is one of the things that cults and high control groups depend on for their preservation is cutting off of relationships of human interaction. Because if you
Boom. Yeah.
interact with a human and they actually care, then you're forced to deal with all the assumptions of all the dogma that you've been taught. And
Right.
s- and similarly, like, well, insert little soundbite here about social media and the internet being like that
Mm-hmm.
because it makes it so easy, like you're saying. I can't say it any better or any differently, but just to reiterate, it's you're you can there's so much less context of lived experience in a human interaction or even long form conversations like this. We are sitting face to face for a period of time, watching each other's facial expressions, feedback, having conversations and dialogue. Look at the amount of data that is lost by text message, much less somebody that you only communicate, who only communicates. Let's say that you're super ambitious and you post 10 times a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
And by most standards, that's super ambitious.
Yeah.
And takes you maybe an hour. That's still less than far less than 5% of your life. So you have this whole, you're inferring from an individual's little windows that they're sharing. Then you look at again, if they're outputting that much, you're probably only catching about 50% of it. And
Mm-hmm.
in addition to that, you're then extrapolating based on your lived experiences about who this person actually is and how they present themselves, as well as other people's experiences who may or may not be lived. Um,
Right. I had a curious conversation with a colleague last week about narcissism. And his point was our fundamental understanding of narcissism today is really completely separated from the clinical definition of what narcissism is. And he asked me the question, he's like, is there a healthy narcissism? And immediately in the moment, just off the top of my head, I was like, well, of course there has to be. There has to be a healthy level of narcissism which goes around getting your needs met. It has to
right.
be. Need for connection, the need for the basics, food, shelter, all these kind of things. Like there is a healthy level of that. And what you were saying kind of made me think of it like within a certain space, when it goes beyond my needs getting met and becomes the obsessive drive to get my needs met, that's where it starts to tip into being self-absorbed and self-involved. And I wonder if we start to live in an echo chamber of our own content creation, and the sole feedback we have is what people are saying about what we produce, then
Mhm.
inevitably it's going to be dehumanizing. There's no option but it to be dehumanizing. That person simply is symbolized by a heart on a screen. You're
Yeah.
not a human being with thoughts and feelings and concerns and a family and that kind of stuff. You are a symbol on a screen. And if you hit that symbol, you're on my side. If you don't hit that symbol, then you're the enemy. It's so dehumanizing.
So isn't there is that's a fascinating question. And you know better than I do, and the details in my mind are fuzzy, but isn't there the idea of insecure narcissism where that leans all the way on the other side of not like can you explain that idea and how does that tie into this conversation?
Yeah, and the idea is the insecure narcissism is I am so afraid that my needs aren't going to be met, whatever they may be, emotional, spiritual, physical, whatever. I'm so afraid those won't get met and I become obsessed with getting those needs met. I have to, and nothing can stand in the way of getting those needs met. So I will manipulate and I will coerce and I will abuse and I will do all those things. That's the far end of the spectrum. And despite what you hear on social media, it's an exceedingly rare thing. The mass of humanity will, like we were talking about earlier, like, I don't want somebody else to feel that way.
Right,
The mass of humanity will reach a line where something happens, they go, oh, wow, that really affected those people. I have to take a step back. That's
right,
what happens. That is exceedingly rare, the extreme. But if you listen to social media and people who talk about it, it's like there's one around every corner.
right,
And that's simply just not true.
right.
Now, what you do have is people that struggle on that spectrum. Of course, we're human beings. So we could see it as a spectrum. We could see I have to get all my needs met, and that's via manipulation, domination, that kind of stuff. But you could also see on the other side of the spectrum, I'm not getting my needs met, and descend into depression and sadness and those kinds of things, and very self-involved that way.
Right.
So the balance is in the middle is I can get my needs met, and those needs are measurable and they're justifiable. And I can also seek to meet the needs of others. There's this balance that has to happen within a human being. And I think we spend the majority of our lives, if not all of our lives, I suspect all of our lives, finding that balance. And in different
Right.
seasons, I shift one way or the other. And I wonder if, and I'm going a little far afield here, so drag me back if I go too far. I wonder with like, because to have that balance, you have to develop a sense of self,
Right.
like who I am, a sense of security within the world. In our current society, and increasingly more so, there's a loss of a sense of self. And most people are not developing a sense of self in childhood and in their formative years. And so it continues. And so what I see in my work is people are not developing a sense of self until their mid 30s.
Wow.
And so you're starting to see there's a very insecure attachment that happens. And so I walk around making myself believe that I have a sense of self and that I'm secure, but I'm not. I'm seeking for security. I'm seeking for attachment well into my 30s. And so there's this insecurity that's happening. And I think for believers, that gets translated into an insecure God.
So I mean, to your point, it makes a lot of sense to me. Life is dynamic, it's fluid. There are times when, for example, when tragedy strikes, that there's you set your own needs aside and you do whatever absolutely must be done in order to survive. I have a friend of
Of
mine, a very
course.
good friend of mine who sacrificed a lot for his wife's health and is coming to the point of now now paying attention to his own needs
Right.
and now coming to reckoning with all of the grief of all of the things that they lost. It wasn't there wasn't a choice. They weren't given a choice. It wasn't, this isn't like we see people sacrificing things for the sake of a career or for the sake of all of those things. Um, and it's heartbreaking to see. And so we go through these seasons where it's like I need to tend to other people's needs because the situation demands it, but we can't live there forever. And we go into seasons where we lean more heavily on our own well-being, and
Mhm.
it ebbs and flows. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I think one of the things about attachment theory that made so much sense to me was the idea that intimacy is not closeness, but the ability to negotiate closeness. And
Mm.
self-care is not, making decisions around myself to meet my own needs. It's the ability to negotiate my needs within the community that I live in. And
Right.
and so it's taxing if one member of a community is always the one who's needy. Um,
Hmm.
or there's one person who's always well fed and everybody else is going hungry. Um,
Right.
that's why togetherness matters.
Right. And
But I'm very
my
curious. Go ahead.
my go-to, because of my attachment, what the attachment that was developed, and just to make a personal point of what you're saying, is I found the way to get my needs met was to go hungry so that others could be fed.
Right.
That was mine, and to a certain degree still is. And I'm wrestling with it every day. Like, I go hungry so you can eat. And that is such a default setting in my head that, like, it plays out in a real practical sense. Instead of eating lunch, I will do a tutoring session with somebody. Legitimate, hands-on, I won't eat so that you can eat.
So remind me to ask about the development of self because I have some interesting questions. Well, I have some questions about that. I'm interested in it. But to your point, so over the last, I've been thinking about this. I'm like, it's scary talking about stuff here because it's like, it's very easy to present yourself as a person where I have found a rhythm and I'm going to stay in this
Got it
rhythm
all
and I
together.
got it all together. But over the
Just to be
past
clear,
month,
for both of us here, neither one of us is proclaiming that.
we know each other well enough to know that it's real. But for the past month or so, I left the laptop at the office, and now it's like, what do I do in the evening? Like, okay, doom scroll. Like, it's always been work. There's always been, I love work. It's fun. I love what I do. And yet, recovery, scientifically speaking, you know how I roll with my arguments. Like, scientifically speaking, recovery happens better when you're not working into the late hours and you're
Right.
better prepared for the next day. I mean, okay, so it's logic. Um, but then what do you do? And so it started going through these layers, one layer after the other of like, okay, I've always worked for myself. I've always made sure that to the best of my ability that I've got enough money coming in to, and sometimes the best of my ability isn't isn't where it needs to be because we go through seasons and business goes through seasons and life goes through seasons and we make mistakes and all of those things. Um, and and it's pointed me to and so with that I've started paying closer attention. I'm like, what would happen if I would ratchet up this goal a little bit, and
Right.
what would happen with that? And all of a sudden I start noticing, well, there's this one thing that I'm doing throughout my day that if I were working for somebody else I wouldn't be doing. Do I want
Hmm.
to be doing that just because I'm working for myself instead of somebody else? What if I viewed
Right.
myself as my own boss? um,
Right.
and and I mean, it's really forced me to confront. I feel like failing in business, candidly, has forced me to confront that I'm going to let others eat. I'm going to go hungry so that I can eat. And
Mm.
there is a genuine world, and I don't want to diminish the reality of um, the value of generosity, even in business, because it is immensely valuable. I
Of course.
all of that. And yet,
But
um,
that's that balance, right?
that is
We were talking about like how do I discern when it's time for me to eat and when it's time for somebody else to eat? Because it certainly can't be I always eat,
right,
and it certainly can't be I never eat. Those are the extremes.
right.
Like looking at the narcissistic spectrum, those are the two poles, right? I never
Yep.
eat, I always eat. So that's what we're wrestling with. That's how we're developing the sense of self, is discerning when it's time for me to eat and when it's time for others to eat. That's the development of the sense of self.
So, how does that sense of self get developed?
It has to be experiential. I have to be in an environment that encourages me to become who God designed me to be and not a function of other people's wants and needs. I was raised in a household where one person's emotions determined the whole outcome of the course, the trajectory. And so I became hyper aware of that person's emotions and I had to manage them. There's
Mhm.
no sense of self there. My sense of self was, can I manage this situation? And I say it all the time. I used to say it all the time. I don't say it as much now because I felt the truth in it. I developed my sense of humor because it was a way to manage the emotions of another.
Right.
It became highly developed because it was a way to manage the emotions of another. When the rage would hit, if I could make that person laugh, then the rage would abate.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. And I suspect comedians develop that sense from childhood. It
Yeah.
was a way that I could manage the emotions of others to make myself feel safe in the world. That's not a sense of self. That's a shell. That's the ego. That's how I make myself feel safe in the world.
But the scary thing, and we've mentioned this a time or two, but the scary thing about that is that you put in the reps, you become good at it, you become recognized for this thing, and it doesn't answer the inner ache of who am I really?
No.
And the worst part about it is, I mean, as a kid, hopefully, in many cases, it's much more likely that people will assume that you haven't developed your sense of self. And when you actually have a string of accomplishments, or you have a resume, or you have something behind it, to break free from that perception is can be incredibly difficult. The
All right.
I've been working with uh, um, a person on branding, and one of the things that she mentioned, she said, people are obsessed with positioning. How do you position yourself in the marketplace? Like, how are you perceived? And she's like, you don't have control of that. That is the result of conclusions that people come to based on what you self disclose about yourself.
All right.
And man, this morning I'm just jumping from topic to topic and I'm losing my train of thought. But in my head, it was connected to what we're talking about.
Well, there's so much here. There's so much here, so many avenues. But think about if you've created your identity around not eating, eventually you're going to starve. And when you get to that place of starvation, you'll do anything to get food.
Yeah.
I remember I was in Africa a number of years ago, and we were working within the community, and there was a group of locals who were kind of helping us and that kind of thing. And great relationships, all that kind of stuff. They hung out with us at where we were staying, and all that kind of thing. And at one point, one of the kids, a teenager, he stole my iPad, or not iPad, iPod, back when that was a thing. Um, Ended up getting it back, and he came and he apologized, and without me even asking the question, he immediately went to, I was starving,
Mm,
and so I could trade this for food.
yeah,
I get it. I get it. What he didn't know at that moment was I was starving too, but just in a different way. And so
yeah,
I understood where he was coming from. And there was a conversation about right, wrong, all that kind of stuff, that proceeded from that. But the first step was, I understand.
yeah. Uh, I immediately let me see if I can find this. Give me just a minute here. Proverbs 30. I have to think of this. Um, Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? As in, I become God.
Yep.
Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of God. I may become so hungry. So let me not, I mean, that's talking about this balance here. Like, let me not be so self-indulged that I always meet my needs and I don't even need God. Like I am so
Yeah.
self-sufficient. I don't need even
Right.
God himself. But also, don't let me be starved to the point that out of desperation to feed the hunger, I will, all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is the challenge that we have with I've really wrestled. Okay, actually not. Um, I've found it very easy to be judgmental of groups that organize themselves around humanitarian causes, whether
Hmm.
it's religious or non-religious. Because in my observation over the years, it's often been an appeal to a certain type of dysfunction in a certain type of person. And if you have this type of dysfunction, then you're going to be willing to come work for this organization, for this cause, at reduced pay because of some intrinsic reward, which the intrinsic reward is presented as if, well, this is just something that's innate with you. But what if it's not? What if that intrinsic reward is a scratch of an itch that or a something that you need to be true about the world in which other people eat first? And so
Right.
the organization eats first, that you're
Hmm.
involved with, the ministry, the church, the anything, and the people that you're serving eat first. And
Right.
then on the heels of that, when this thing grows, climbs, becomes whatever, and then you're the fallout. And
Mhm.
I've seen situations where I mean there's a very clear timeline. Like people have a life cycle that most people have a life cycle where they can go through that eating last this long, and then it's they have a falling out, and the system needs fresh blood. Like,
Yep.
um, but then also let's go back to this whole idea of we've talked about celebrity pastors, megachurch, all of these types of things. We think that so what if that dysfunction, and I'm not saying it is in all cases, I don't even pretend to know, but it's very easy to envision a world in which their dysfunction is their coping mechanism or whatever. Probably terrible choice of words, but their mode of operating is I'm going to eat last. So God comes first, and the people in my
Mhm.
church come first, and the business of church comes first. And then
Right.
you get to a point where they're so
Where you're
absolutely
starving.
you're starving, utterly depleted. And that's so many of these like horrible tragedies like come of people of leaders having moral moral failings and all
Of
of these
course.
types of things that like
Of course.
It's
And
interesting.
not to excuse that process, because we're certainly not saying that. We're saying it's a factor within the process.
Right.
And that we're not saying, oh, understand, let the moral failure go
Right.
because of this. No, we're providing context for the moral failure, and there's a vast difference between those two. But this is a person who was starving.
But it really is this call. But I mean, isn't is it possible that this Proverbs 30 dynamic is the dynamic within our churches?
Yeah,
That that the congregation has sat on the side of let me eat and be full and be satisfied so I don't have needs. And I mean, a lot of people point to the answer. Okay, there's definitely an answer of like, well, you just I'm not saying this is universal, but whatever. Sometimes it's just like you just need to make the decision not to do that. But then if you don't do that, how are you going to feed the hunger? And how do you get off the treadmill of that?
yeah, right,
And so how do you live with justice and with compassion in the middle of that? But
right.
also, how do we change the way that we think about church, think about ministry, think about doing good in the world? And I think it's one of the reasons why I don't know the full limitations of this, but it feels to me like the um the redemption of one of the things I like about the idea of work being sacred, the redemption of businesses being holy can be holy. It's not always holy, let's be honest. But that it creates a space in which there's a lot more play in terms of who gets fed and when and how.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
saying it's a perfect picture, but
No, and it's not going to be because we're not perfect. We're imperfect beings, and that's the reality of it. As you were talking, this thought came into mind. It just hit me in this moment. Like I have a colleague that we work pretty much the same schedule, so work really closely. And I come in a little bit later, and so like I'll pick up coffee on the way. And at a certain point, this colleague was like, "Hey, I'm going to pick up coffee today." I was like, "Okay, that's awesome. What do you want?" Without even thinking about it, in my head, black coffee. That's it. I don't like black coffee. That would not be my first choice, but I chose it because they eat first.
yeah.
I'm not going to put a burden on them. But the ratio, because I come in later, just functionally, logistically, it works out. It's like 5 to 1. For every five I buy, they buy one.
Yep.
But still, in my mind, the first thought is they eat first. Black
Yeah.
coffee costs you 350 in California at Starbucks. How do I minimize that? Because it almost seems sacrilegious to me to order the. There's a place out here called Better Buzz, and my wife drove through the other day, and she got a $10 drink, not knowing that it was $10, and we're like, $10? What is in it? Like gold flakes? But to me, it'd be sacrilegious to order the $10 drink. Functionally, financially, my colleague's still coming out ahead,
Right.
but internally, no. I'm taking advantage. Those are the type of balance things. That's like the sense of self, of being curious about that. Why is that okay?
I mean, fairness as a side note is such a difficult thing to nail down. Is it fair?
Right. Well, anytime somebody would mention the term fair to me over the last 10 years, I'd say, what do you mean by that? made ham and ha, and I go, what you actually mean by that is I didn't get what I wanted.
Right.
Okay, which I think is probably a pretty fair definition for most people.
Kevin, what do you mean by fair in terms of a fair
Ex
definition?
right, exactly. And so I started to think about it. I was like, what I mean by fair is you eat and I don't. That's
Yeah.
fair. That's been my lived definition of the term.
So then implicitly, there's, following your logic, there's something that you want by not eating,
Right.
which is a
What is
perception
it?
of other
What is the
people
thing that I want?
or something, like, yeah,
That's the real sticky question that you just stumbled upon. What is it that I actually want? To be loved.
yeah. Is this, and I don't know if this is a pattern. This is a little bit for me where I kind of went through this period of people were like, you're putting yourself last, putting yourself last, putting yourself last. And then you start asking for things that you want or need. And then you're like, I don't know where this line actually lives, where it's like, okay, but when you actually find love, there's so much less that you actually want. Like, why do I have to have? I mean, over the last 4 months, I've gone on a wild cutting spree, and it probably makes it sound more severe than what it actually is, or maybe it is more grand than it actually presents to be. But I don't know. Um, but I've just had a lot of fun of like, okay, that's not necessary. Like, I'm not going to spend for that. No, there's other stuff too that I'm just like, okay, I know this technically isn't necessary. I'm going to spend for it anyway. Who cares? Um, but there's this. So maybe the difference in this whole thing comes down to, are we doing it out of a position? Do we understand our worth, our acceptance, our love, our value in the world? And there may even be a world in which you make a decision to live by this ethos of other people generally eat first because that's how you want to show up in the world.
Right,
And that doesn't necessarily have to be, as long as you're coming from that in a position of love, and if you're still making sure that you consistently get fed, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily an unhealthy thing. It could be, but it
right.
doesn't. It's it's not a foregone conclusion that it's wrong.
No, no. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance to it. There is. Can I look back over my past and say it was 100% healthy? No, it's ridiculous. Can I look back over my past and say it was 100% dysfunctional? No, that's equally ridiculous. But the curious thing is, there's a part of me that's like, well, maybe that's not so ridiculous. This pure healthy, no problem thing. That's ridiculous. This part, have difficulty saying. I say it and I mean it, but there's a part of me that's like, well, maybe that's not totally true. But there's subtlety and nuance in this. Our entire journeys are a mixture of function and dysfunction. It's what it means to be a human being. And until you sit across from somebody and actually have the conversation and ask the questions and listen and be engaged, then you're never getting to that answer. You're going to be left with the straw man.
Yeah,
And if that person pisses me off, then I burn the straw man down.
right, right. There is also a commitment that we make to ourselves in humanizing ourselves so that we will naturally humanize others. And I think the more that we dehumanize ourselves, the more likely we are to dehumanize others. And I mean, dehumanizing can be a really, I mean, it can be a really functional short-term deal, short-term tool.
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
yeah. Very effective in the
very
moment.
effective in the moment.
Yeah.
but but when it becomes a lived pattern over time, and it like yeah,
Right. As a writer, I see a tendency in human beings to flatten a story. And it's very subjective. It's very right, wrong, good, evil, light, dark, that kind of stuff. And there's a certain type of writing where that happens. But I think in the truth, in reality, to become a good writer, a good human being, a good whatever, you have to be able to allow the full scope of the situation to appear. You can't flatten it into a binary.
right.
It has to be in an infinite complexity. And there has to be a point where I say, I don't know. That's acknowledging infinite complexity. If you can't acknowledge that, if we can't acknowledge that, then the risk we run is flattening everything into a binary and then creating an us versus them mindset. And what is our world other than flattened into a binary, and light and dark, good and evil, right and wrong?
It reminds me, this is, man, I'm so bad at secondhand knowledge. I've I have a friend of mine years ago who recommended Dorothy Sayers' book, The Mind of the Maker,
Mm,
and one of the things that she talks about, I hear in the book, is about this idea that there comes a point at which the work's internal logic, the formation of the story, the characters in the story, takes on a life of its own, and you lose control of the characters.
mm,
Um, and the characters have to like to be consistent within the story to make sense. Like you can't just reach into the story and be like, "Oh, well, that was dumb. I don't want this person to have this personality, so I'm gonna, whatever. What are you gonna do? Like some kind of
mm.
sci-fi supernatural encounter that, or I don't know what, like tragic brain injury that changes their personality and flips it on its, like I don't know, like
Right.
um, and there's this with this whole idea. So there's this emergence of, to your point, you can't flatten the story. The story wants to take shape. It wants to take vivid shape if we only allow it. Um, and even with this whole idea of an insecure God, like there's this. Um, I keep coming back to this core concept of if God is reality, if seeing things from God's perspective is seeing things as they are, then the only reason we need an insecure God is if we have a distortion of reality that we need to defend.
Yes.
And so it's like here's reality. I don't want this to be true. I want this other thing not to be true. So let me create a complementary mirror God of my situation that can support my delusion so that I can
Hmm.
continue to live in my self deception.
Exactly.
And
And
then because of what I have at stake, I have to defend that God. And he's incapable of defending himself because he's not real. He's not true.
right, right, right. And so the question at that point becomes, can I acknowledge the God that I have created and why I need him so, or her so? Not to put a gender specific thing on it. Can I acknowledge the God I have created and why I need them so?
And we touched on this a little bit last time. Can we trust that curiosity actually leads to the truth?
Right. Jesus seems to think so. Abide in me, and I will abide in you, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Ask, seek, knock. Whoever seeks finds, whoever asks receives. Whoever knocks, the door will be open.
Right. If your God is so insecure that he can't be investigated, you may want to find out the name of your God.
I think we're coming down to fairly definitional types of things. Like if God and truth, for God to be God, then God and truth have to be like they have to share essence.
Yeah. They have to be the same thing.
Yeah.
If your God is about soothing your feelings, that's an idol. And that's a very bold statement. And I say it because it rings true for me and for many I've walked with. If your God is about soothing your feelings, then your God is an idol. It is not God. And I'm okay with it if you can acknowledge it. But if you keep pretending that your God is God in his sole function, you would probably never say this out loud because we don't want to say this out loud. But if you, in the quiet place, if you can see your God is about soothing your feelings, then you have created that God.
Okay. So when you're confronted with these uncomfortable feelings, can we draw a distinction? What is the unhealthy and what is the healthy?
The unhealthy is fix this.
And the
I
healthy
want to
is
detach from it, this experience. And I get it. We all do it. It's painful. The healthy is this exists. I'm curious about it.
yes. And I'm willing to exist with this discomfort and remain present with God.
Yeah. I think that's the mic drop moment. We just we just wrapped it up.
Yeah, man. There's a lot. There's still so much that we haven't dug into.
Yeah.
Um, I'm very curious. I was fascinated in our last conversation how much dogmatism ties in to this idea of an insecure God. Um,
Because dogmatism is I know. And you're saying that in the face of infinite complexity.
right.
You almost have to create a God of your own making at that point. You almost have to create an idol. I mean, you don't have to, but the next logical step is creating an idol.
It's trading an idol to defend that. Wow. I remember it, my brother did a research paper in high school on logic, and one of the books that he used, I believe this is the one, All Truth is God's Truth by Arthur F. Holmes. Also, secondhand reading here.
Mm,
Um, I remember being struck when he got the book, struck by this idea that logic, I mean, it was just the early formation of this idea that logic and reason and facts don't have to be at odds. I have a much more coherent perspective at this point of how this fits into faith, but don't have to be at odds with faith, and that curiosity doesn't have to be at odds with faith. Now, there does have to be an admission of partial viewpoints, incomplete data, um,
hmm
all of that. Like that has to be, there has to be an admission of that. Otherwise, I mean, logic conclusions always fail. with incomplete data. So even with that, there's not necessarily uh, things as definitively true. It's things properly defined with high probabilities of truth, I suppose. I mean, if you lived on the Earth all your life, you would assume gravity to be a force that's always at play, but you wouldn't understand its dynamics until you left the Earth's gravity. And even with that, do we really fully understand all the aspects of gravity? Because,
No.
again, limited context. So,
I think something powerful to dive into next week. It strikes me what we're talking about could be considered very theoretical. Of course, these are ideas, concepts, things, curiosities we're wrestling with. But what does this look like to actually live this out? Because that's a true measure of a theory, right? What does it look like practically when you live it out to be able to prove it?
okay, so explain that just a little bit of definition before we wrap. What does it look
Yeah.
like to live
So
out?
we can sit here and talk about curiosity and knowing and being known and all these kinds of things. And it could create this beautiful picture of what a life lived under those principles looks like. But what does it actually look like for the human being? You and I as case studies within this environment. What does it actually look like?
I have a hint. It's dark. It's really, really dark.
Going back to the beginning, right?
Going back to the beginning,
We always circle back.
we always circle back somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
something really fascinating, like the lived experience of this.
And I think if we can, as much as possible, tying back to stories, because stories are what crystallize our understanding of events and also makes insights transferable to other people. So,
Yeah.
in whatever way that it's helpful.
Yep.
All right. Well, so the closing altar call, come just as I am, you know, the just as I am thing.
Uh-huh.
And if you've created an insecure God, here's your chance. No, but in all seriousness, without poking fun at that, like it is a challenge. I have the challenge written out on my little notepad that I keep beside my laptop here as we're recording because pulling back the layers and just continuing to make the decision because after years of cutting myself off from the discomfort, it's very easy to cut myself off from the discomfort, but making the ongoing decision to
Yep.
stay in the discomfort, lean into the emotion, allow God to be present in the midst of the challenge, and refuse to be unmoved, refuse not to be moved towards immediate fixing, but just be there
Yep.
because that's kind of the point.
Yep. Yep.
Cool,
All right, my friend.
good times. Well,
Good times.
thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Until we meet again.
Until we meet again, we'll talk next.
Okay. Bye.